Some big news on the injury front around the NFL. Number one, starting quarterback for the Los Angeles Chargers, Justin Herbert. New regime there. Potentially the start of his season in doubt. And it looks like DeAndre Hopkins will miss the start of the 2024 NFL season. And a whole lot more coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Of course, we love our everydayers, but some of y'all ain't subscribed up. So make sure you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you listen to this podcast. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down and the sports stop sporting like we want them to. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/. No, you don't even have to do the slash anymore. Just go to FanDuel.com, okay? That's where it's at to get it started. All right. Justin Herbert, according to multiple reports, it is a plantar fascia in his right foot. So the team announced Justin Herbert diagnosed with an injury to his plantar fascia in his right foot. He'll be in a boot for at least 2 weeks, then gradually working his way back. This, according to Ian Rappaport, the team says the expectation is he'll be ready for the start of the season. Now, Adam Schefter at ESPN went on, Matt, to report that he may be back for the start of the regular season, but that may be the expectation. He's going to be playing through a lot of discomfort if that is the case, if he is indeed back and ready to play that part of the season. And potentially that discomfort could last the entirety of the 2024 season, Matt. So that's not the way that Justin Herbert wanted to start out this year, that plantar fascia. And obviously you're going to be on your foot the entire time. So it's hard to, unload that thing when you're playing football. And obviously it's going to affect this football team if he's not right all year.
I really don't like the sound of this, to be honest with you. I mean, not to overreact in very early August for training camp stuff, but kind of reminds me of Burrow last year when he couldn't really practice with the team, and then he comes back and he's not the same, and then he starts to get it going, then he gets hurt again. And both those guys, Burrow and Herbert, have dealt with a lot of injuries over their careers. I mean, some strange ones like having your trainer puncture your lung and things like that. I mean, that was Tucker, or that was Tyler Taylor. I'm sorry. But there has been some weird
That's why he got to play in the first place. But
right,
it's definitely a Chargers thing right now with these oddball injuries. But he did have he had a rib of his own, right? Or a core injury.
He had a bunch of stuff. Yeah.
And that affected that entire season.
100%. So that's his foot that he pushes off of, which I think would be better if it was his left foot. I'm not a medical expert, but I do know this injury really, really looms, because just when you think you're starting to make progress with it, you can wake up and step out of bed and it'll tear even more. Like it happens all the time. I know it's very, very frustrating. All these young, unproven receivers, brand new coaching staff, brand new situation. You thought the constant was going to be Herbert, and now he's not going to be there at a crucial time, a crucial situation for the team as a whole.
Stephania Bell, who does a lot of injury stuff and, on the fantasy side of things at ESPN, she actually had this same injury and, different situation. And so she was reporting on it. She's like, it's, a month, I can't run. And now this isn't an NFL athlete or anything like that. But, the layperson would be laid up for a while with this injury. Yeah. You wouldn't be dreaming of doing anything like playing a football game, whether it's a turkey bowl or whatever, on this type of injury. And so that's kind of like the diciness of an injury like plantar fascia that can really last a long time. And a walking boot, I would imagine he's on a walking boot a lot just to unload it, even if even beyond the first 2 weeks. And obviously it's going to affect practice. And that's what you're talking about. Your new offense, new team that you're trying to put together there with the Chargers. So this, it screws up the whole thing. You hate to hear this kind of a story at this point in camp.
And of course, Stephon, you would know way better than me, and I didn't know she dealt with it, but I do know that you expect setbacks. Like you make a little progress one day and then you take 2 steps back, and it gets really frustrating, and it's a harder injury to predict. He's a big guy that puts a lot of stress on it, and this is his foot that he's going to push off of. So I don't like the sounds of this at all. And to be very honest, I feel like Vegas, the over-under win totals, a lot of prognosticators out there are too high on the Chargers this year anyway. I mean, I get that Harbaugh is a tremendous coach and he can make waves and turn bad teams around, but I just don't see any talent on offense besides the line and Herbert. And I think up the middle, especially at defensive tackle, they're really poor too. So I think next year is what I'm excited about the Chargers to begin with, let alone hearing this injury.
Yeah, it's a tough one. And with this kind of injury, get his foot stepped on, even if he's ready to play in week 1, and all of a sudden, boom, there you go, now set back. And so, yeah, you don't want to overdo it with the hyperbole here, but not a great start to this season for Justin Herbert and the Los Angeles Chargers. I want to stick with the quarterbacks here because there's some other more major injuries around the NFL. But since we're talking quarterbacks, there might be some teams with extra quarterbacks that might be able to, I don't know if there are many teams with extra quarterbacks, but some might have an extra guy that they might be willing to trade because Andy Dalton apparently has an injury now. And the Carolina Panthers have let it be known that they're in the market to potentially add a veteran quarterback to help back up Bryce Young there in Carolina. And, obviously that's not a huge part of their team, and they would hope that Andy Dalton doesn't have to play at all, but you got to be able to field the team, and you got to be able to throw guys out there in the preseason. So you might need to get somebody in there quick, whether it's just an undrafted guy off the street or maybe swinging a little bit of a trade from a team that has extra quarterbacks. And who knows, maybe the Chargers might have to add a guy throughout the rest of the summer as well.
Yeah, I don't know a lot of quarterbacks off the top of my head that you can pick up on the cheap. I mean, I think guys will become available, but there's not a lot out there to speak, and that needs to sort itself out. And a lot of these teams need to be more comfortable with their young guy before they're moving an old guy, which kind of brings us to Carolina. I mean, the fact that Andy Dalton's injured isn't going to change the balance of whether the Panthers pick first overall or win the Super Bowl. I mean, it's not that big of a needle mover. And frankly, I think his biggest value is being big brother to Bryce, be the conduit to the coaching staff, been around the block. By all accounts, he does that really well, and he can do that injured as well. But he has value on the field, though. He's a quality back.
Some more injuries that are out there this week, and they're starting to stack up around the NFL, and some pretty big names. I think less extensive injuries in some of these. We're going to get to DeAndre Hopkins next, but Josh Jacobs looks like he's going to be okay, but came up banged up a little bit in Packers camp. Geno Smith was hit on a play. There was a little bit of a consternation amongst the Seahawks fans if we should be blaming one of those young defensive linemen that accidentally hit Geno Smith. Because you're not supposed to hit quarterbacks, but he came up lame at Seahawks camp, and Deontay Foreman, I think, Jerry Jeudy, and some others from the Broncos as well.
Elijah Moore and Jerry Jeudy from the Browns,
So tis the season, I think, and everyone's going to be very, very cautious with these injuries in all of these training camps. And, there's tons more that are happening around the NFL, and we're going to see guys take it easy. We're going to see a lot of starters not playing in the preseason for the same reasons. So it's going to be fun to see all those third stringers out there, just like we saw in the Hall of Fame game, Matt. So next, let's talk DeAndre Hopkins. This is a big one, out 4 to 6 weeks with a knee injury, what that means for the Tennessee Titans, and anything we could glean from the new kickoffs next. This episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car into the MVP and bring home that W. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. DeAndre Hopkins. This is a tough one. DeAndre Hopkins, 4 to 6 weeks is the prognosis now for Hopkins, who has a knee injury, and that means he will miss the start of the NFL season if it's 6 weeks, man.
Yeah, and he's not young. He was never the swiftest, most dynamic guy anyway, and isn't anymore. Is he going to lose a step? Potentially. I think he can overcome that as a player because of his style of play. He's such a great contested catch guy that I don't know that speed or quickness or ability to plant on that knee is as important to him as others. And fortunately for Tennessee, they signed Tyler Boyd, which I didn't think was that big a deal, but they also signed Ridley. They had their incumbents. They also have Burks, who maybe does something or at least gets more of an opportunity now. But my worry is just kind of like with all these is quarterback development. I mean, I think there's a couple of these teams. We touched on Carolina. I think the Tennessee's in this boat where we put a lot around a young quarterback that's already a year in, and we expect to at least have an answer on Will Levis. Is he our answer at the end of the year, or do we have to go back to the well and find a quarterback? And Hopkins is great for that. I mean, any young quarterback would love to have Hopkins. You just don't want to get behind the 8 ball on these too early. If he misses, maybe he misses the first 2 or 3 weeks. That'd be rough.
I don't have high hopes for the Tennessee Titans. As long as he's back within the first couple of weeks, you're building something there. I don't think this is a big deal. Certainly, it's not on the level of Justin Herbert. And hopefully with a knee injury like this, you get it fixed and then you're fine once you do play, even if it is a couple weeks into the season, where even if you miss 4 weeks and you go on the PUP or whatever, I guess you can't go on the PUP because that has to start. You have to start the preseason, or you have to start camp hurt to be on the PUP. So I guess it would have to be an IR situation. But anyway, it's not going to derail their season. It's not the quarterback. You can, fit a guy in for a couple of weeks, get a couple extra looks at Treylon Burks before, he gets benched or whatever, if he's not the dude. And so not a huge deal, but not ideal either for your young quarterback, because you want to have your Wooby there if you're Will Levis in your development. And he's not going to be there for any of the preseason games. He's not going to be there for the rest of the camp. And he's not going to be there potentially to start the season for a couple of weeks. So not ideal, but not nearly on the level of Justin Herbert potentially being hurt all year long for the Chargers.
100%. So from a fantasy angle, how much do you bump up Calvin Ridley? Like, I just pulled up my receiver ranks here, and I wasn't super high on Ridley, and I didn't love the signing, but I have him like behind Zay Flowers, Chris Godwin, Stephon Diggs, Deontay Johnson. Are you willing to put him over any of those guys with this? I don't know that I'm overreacting for that.
Yeah, I didn't love what I saw from Calvin Ridley in the Jags offense last year. I would probably just fade everybody. I'm already kind of fading the Titans offense, if you can tell by how I spoke about the Hopkins injury and how much it matters. Maybe Chig, or maybe you draft Chig instead of not drafting him or something like that. Tight end, someone that's like a chain moving piece to the offense. Maybe the running.
I like that angle.
Calvin Ridley operates differently, and I'm sure some more targets would go his way. But if his ADP starts to climb, then I'm not going to pay that price either, because I didn't really like his current price. But maybe if his ADP stayed, then I'd be on board with Calvin Ridley, just because he's going to get some more. But then once DeAndre Hopkins is back and you're in your fantasy playoffs, then it won't matter anyway.
Yeah, I agree. And obviously this hurts Hopkins' fantasy stock as well. They do. I think it is pretty clear. Head coach comes over from the Bengals. They bring in a slot receiver from the Bengals that they want to mimic what they've done in Cincinnati quite a bit. And that means a lot of 3 receiver sets. I think that, gets muddied a little bit here at the start.
Yeah, maybe that's the way to go.
Yeah. I like the Chig call. I might bump him a little bit.
He goes for, I don't know where he's ADP ranked right now. He goes from like 17th to 15th tight end.
Right, exactly. I like the way you said it, from not drafting him to taking a flyer on him.
Last pick in the draft.
Right.
Your backup tight end in a deeper league. All right. Hall of Fame game. Obviously anticlimactic. We knew there's not going to be starters out there, but it's worth watching because this is the first time we've seen a real game where the new kickoff rules were in play. So what was your takeaway from watching the kickoffs in the Hall of Fame game? And, the real reason we have a Hall of Fame game is so guys can get inducted into the Hall of Fame, which is going to happen later this weekend. We'll talk more about that next week. But as far as kickoffs go in the Hall of Fame game, unless you have some other hot takes from the deep part of the depth chart on the Texans or the Bears, Matt.
Not really. I mean, to pull back the curtain, as is the case every Hall of Fame game, I'm here in Latrobe, PA. I'm not home. And it kind of sneaks up on me unless the Steelers happen to be in it because we're doing our usual training camp stuff. But I made sure I got to the bar before 8 to watch it. But I was at a bar with a bunch of people.
Yeah,
and
you're already 4 martinis deep in a bar with no audio watching this game. So you set the stage. I can picture it.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much the stage. Exactly. So the one thing we did do, though, I mean, there's a bunch of reporter types and, who I'm hanging with, is every time there was a kickoff, we'd be like, oh, let's stop and watch it. And the returner fell over like 2 or 3 times. He slipped and there was weather and then it poured like crazy and the game got canceled. So there wasn't much to take from this particular game. Like I got a kick out of, watching Steeler practice, how they're starting to handle things. And we talked about that the other day, what personnel they're using on both groups, more so than I got out of seeing this game because there wasn't a lot to take away. But 2 things I wanted to bring up was it does seem like if you could break a tackle, and nobody could last night, but if you could break a first tackle, you might be able to get past that entire wave, pretty easily. Because I thought teams might handle it like, let's kick it to the right and let's send 5 guys to the right, and then the group behind them could follow like linebackers almost, where these guys, it seems like everyone's just attacking the gap and trying to make a play. And I think that's a little bit risky. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up, which we were just laughing at last night, is they intentionally, I assume the league told them they had to. Remember when the rule went through and I'm like, well, what happens if the ball gets blown off the tee? Well, last week they installed a rule that a 12th person comes out, holds the ball like Charlie Brown, and then runs off the field. Well, the ball was not falling off the tee last night, but they had to practice that. I'm like, this is so dumb.
I love how much like flexibility and, how much effort is being put into making this happen to the point where we're putting a 12th man on the field for the first time in NFL history that runs off the field. That's insane. I love that. It's comical to me, but you could tell that,
and we had to practice it.
Yeah, exactly. You could tell that neither unit was super practiced up on the return or the coverage of it, but nothing was broken and it didn't look like it was imminent where there's just going to be huge plays all over the place. But I'm glad you mentioned the first wave thing, because that was my biggest takeaway, because there wasn't a lot happening with the kick returns here in game number 1, but you could absolutely see the scenario where big plays could happen by breaking through that first wave.
Yeah.
Just getting by. All you got to do is make one guy miss, break one. It's a huge play. And so that was my biggest takeaway there. We haven't seen it yet, but once we get, an entire week of preseason games next week, then I think we might see something like that. And I'm interested to see how different it looks, or if everyone kind of does the same thing that these 2 teams were doing on Thursday night. And I'm sure there's going to be some interesting stuff employed by some of these teams, just trying things out. But how many people can get through that first wave if this is how everybody plays it is my big question, because there's got to be an opportunity for big plays in that case.
Yeah, and my other takeaway, and I think we touched on this the other day, but I've been talking on a lot of different outlets about it, is deep down, I think some of these coaches, once they allow a big play or 2, is going to say, man, if I just kick this thing out of the end zone and they start at the 30, I can get my practice time back and work on run defense or pass rush or whatever. And instead of spending so much time on this damn thing, and just live with starting field position at the 30, because we've given up 2 touchdowns in 5 weeks and it's making me crazy anyways, and we're not good at it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We'll see how teams play it. We've got a little bit of of eyes on what's happening with the new kickoff rules, and we will continue to follow that, no doubt, after next week's preseason games. Next, let's talk holdouts, hold-ins. What is the status of all these contract disputes? Some done, some not, around the NFL. Next. This episode of Peacock and Williamson brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. I love sports. You love sports. Matt loves sports. It's why we're all here together. But as the playoffs have winded down in the NBA and the NHL, things get a little bit more lean in the sporting world. Now, thankfully, there's Olympics this summer, but really all you have to do is open up the FanDuel app and dream up any bets you want anytime you're in the mood, whether it's Olympics, whether it's Major League Baseball this summer. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. All you got to do is head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. And yes, there is a ton of ways to bet on the NFL, not just preseason affairs, but over under win totals, who's going to win the next Super Bowl, players-specific props, who's going to be the league leader in passing yards, rushing yards, receiving yards, all of it at FanDuel.com. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right. I love the news breaking aspect and the rumor aspect and contracts around the NFL. And obviously we saw a couple really big ones last week with Tua and Jordan Love signing mega contracts. We've seen some offensive linemen sign their deals, which is why I think 49ers offensive tackle Trent Williams is holding out from camp because he wants to be the #1 paid guy. And a few players have gone over the top of him this offseason. And then you have Brandon Aiyuk, who's holding in. And we saw him. We did an entire episode of Locked On 49ers about Brandon Aiyuk dapping up John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan on the field at practice, even though he's not watching, like an ex-girlfriend making sure that Ricky Pearsall doesn't get too many snaps or something like that. But no deal is imminent there. Colin Cowherd said that Brandon Aiyuk is supposed to have a deal done in the next couple of days. And then Mike Silver, who's really plugged in with the 49ers and nationally, says, nope, that's not the case. There is not only not an imminent contract, but there's no trade happening either, because there were some rumblings about potentially a trade. So I don't know what the heck to think about the hold in and hold outs with the 49ers. But then you have Jamar Chase, and he's got a hold in going on, reported to camp, not practicing with the Cincinnati Bengals. Not a lot has been talked about the Jamar Chase contract situation. And then obviously you have CeeDee Lamb, who was part of the same first round as Brandon Aiyuk, who has not reported to camp. And there was some rumors that maybe a deal could be done, but that still hasn't been figured out. What do you think about some of these hold-ins, holdouts? And there's a lot more. Matt Judon and Alvin Kamara out there. There's a lot of guys angling for new contracts.
Yeah, and one I don't think we talked about is Tristan Wirfs. I mean, Penei Sewell signed a big deal this offseason. I think Wirfs is almost worth every bit. I mean, I think they're the two most valuable offensive linemen in the league. And I thought it was kind of crazy last year when they took Wirfs from right tackle, where he was so good, and put him at left. Well, he didn't skip a beat. He might even got better. And then they allowed Getke to play right tackle, which is, so you got better at two spots in a way. I mean, the puzzle fit better. So that was one we just need to throw out there. He's pretty awesome. I don't know. I mean, it sure seems like the Niners in particular with Aiyuk is just a game of chicken almost, who's going to break first. But I mean, I thought Dallas would have something done by now. Is Chase really going to get a contract this year? I mean, he's a year away compared to some of these other guys. That one's a little odd.
He's a year behind where Aiyuk and CeeDee Lamb are.
Yeah.
I think for him, he's just
he's got a teammate holder, right?
Yeah, he's like prepping the team and being like, okay, it's going to be a big contract, needs to get done. I don't know that it needs to get done right now today for them. The Cowboys is interesting because Jerry Jones is talking, just kind of using coded words and talking weird, saying, oh, we're all in this year, but not really talking about long term. So it's like, okay, well, which guy are you not going to sign then? Because it sounds like he's prepping his fan base that they're not going to sign a guy because they can't afford all these at one time, and that you got to pay the rest of a roster. And so does that mean that they're wanting CeeDee Lamb to play under the 5th-year option? Then they're going to sign Dak and Micah Parsons, because those are going to be huge contracts? Or is this just preparing the fan base that Dak is not going to be re-signed long-term? because something is up with the Dallas Cowboys, and it's a very interesting, probably the most interesting stars to play. Their roster is too good. It's a good problem to have, but they're trying to get their number, and I think they don't want to budge. And right now, they feel like they don't have to budge. And Trent Williams was one of the top paid tackles in the league until some new deals got signed this offseason. And he's like, I want number one money again. And the Niners are like, well, we don't really need you to practice until like the last week before the season. So go ahead and sit out and take your fines for a while, and we'll coach up everybody else and get everybody their reps. And he doesn't practice half the time anyway. And I think there is some, and the salary cap in some ways is fake, and you can circumvent it. But for the 49ers, they have so many, and then you got Brock Purdy coming up next offseason. There's a real, they have to be real about it, and they have been real. They asked Kyle Juszczyk to take a pay cut, and he did. Kyle Juszczyk's the best fullback in the league. He's taking less money than he played for last year just to stay. They asked Eric Armstead, who was a big-time player. His nickname was the Blueprint because he's so important to that team. They said, will you take a pay cut? And he said, nope. And now he's on this for the 49ers where they have to make some decisions. And if they ask everybody to play for a little bit less, the guys who say no might be the ones that are gone. And right now, it sounds like Aiyuk and Trent Williams aren't budging on their end either, and the 49ers aren't ready to go any further with those. So I think that's kind of where we're at with those two contracts with the San Francisco 49ers. I have a feeling that Matt Judon could be a trade.
I want to bring him up.
Is he a trade candidate to you?
So real quick, I think Miami is sort of similar to the Niners in that, but they just signed their quarterback. Well, pretty soon it's going to get real hairy, and they get a lot of big ones. I want to go back to Dallas, and then I want to finish up with Judon too. One thing we don't talk about enough is these contracts. It helps to have a wealthy owner, and of course, all 32 of these families, whoever, are wealthy, but some are way better off in terms of cash spending. And Dallas is at the top of the list. I mean, they're like the most valuable franchise on the planet. So, I mean, that is odd to me that they're the team that could structure things in terms of spending out of Jerry's pocket directly, more so than the Steelers or some of these family-owned teams or Green Bay or whatever like that. And they still have it. It makes me wonder what's going on there. And I'm not saying Jerry's losing it, but he's up in age, and maybe he just sees the world differently than he did when he was 60 or whatever, too. I just think that's a weird situation. And I'm glad you brought up Judon, because I think of all these names we've mentioned, he's the one most likely to get traded. You know, he's not young. Their timeline's not now. He was a Belichick favorite. You could get something pretty nice for him. You know, I mean, he's a good player that everybody could use. Maybe that turns into a draft pick to help your O-line or receiver room down the road. I mean, he's the one I could see getting moved.
The other fascinating name, also another edge guy who already got moved, but still hasn't been able to figure out a new deal with his new team, is Hassan Reddick, who's holding out of Jets camp. And they had to know this was coming, but I don't know how far apart they are. And that's
how do you let this happen if you're the Jets?
This
he was holding out with the Eagles, and you trade for him. You think he's all of a sudden happy with his contract because he's in New York?
So here's what was Robert Saleh, the head coach's quote this week at camp. He said, quote, our coaches are all speaking to him and all that. From a business standpoint, he's got to do what he's got to do. If this is what he feels is the best choice for him and his family, then that's what he has to do. So there's some communications, and I think, probably coaches talking to him like, here's what we're installing. This is what we're doing. He's a pass rusher. He should be able to figure things out pretty quickly, even if he's not around and not in meetings and not practicing. But
I agree on that.
I think because a lot of people are talking about Robert Saleh, and he's on the hot seat this year. I was like, well, to me, Robert Saleh has done a phenomenal job. The defense is one of the best in the NFL. They've had awful quarterback play. That's on the GM. That's not on the head coach. And it's on the GM with Hassan Reddick, because that's why you get deals done and you get the contract done along with the trade. They traded for a guy who was already in a contract dispute. So I don't know what they thought was going to happen here. And it actually helps Hassan Reddick's leverage that they traded for him without the new contract in place.
I think this is a really foolish move by the organization. Like, trade for Hassan Reddick, fine. And I'm with you. I don't think he needs a lot of reps to be a valuable contributor in week one. But that contract has to get done the second the trade happens. You have to have that in place already. Like, it's one of the stranger things that I don't think enough people are talking about. Why do you, And if anything, like you said, Reddick's leverage goes up because you just gave something up for me.
Yep, I totally agree. We see that
Right.
one absolutely the same way, and I think that's GMing 101. I think that's why teams do that. I think for the Jets, they probably have their backs against the wall, and they think, well, this is a way for us to get better. Let's make this trade because it's available and figure it out later. Well, that figuring out has been a little bit more difficult, and that's why teams operate the way they do normally.
Yeah.
And for
sure
the Jets, I think
I'm sure Hassan Reddick's agents like, great. Okay, now we have more leverage. I might even ask for more.
Yeah, and look, Aaron Rodgers is healthy, and hopefully that thing goes great for the Jets. I think Joe Douglas is a pretty good GM, and he's obviously built a really good roster. I think Robert Saleh is a really good coach. They've just screwed up a couple of really key things, namely quarterback, and now this is just a little bit funky. But I don't think they're in trouble if he's not ready to go, and I don't think Hassan Reddick's going to necessarily want to miss paychecks either. So this is one that might be like, okay, this goes all the way down to the start of the season, maybe even into the season before they figure something out that is like, okay, look, let's give you more money for this year, then you can go be a free agent and we can't tag you, or one of those types of deals.
I don't think it reflects great on ownership either, but to give them the benefit of the doubt, maybe they're closer than we think, and they both realize that these practices aren't that important for Reddick.
Right. It's still early.
Reps or,
yeah. You see a lot of deals done like right about the time that, that first ramp up period, the first week is done, then you get into pads. But we're starting to see some exhibition games and preseason games happening. And you want to have your team ready and ready to play and get at least one good solid, quarter of play from your starters in the preseason in that third preseason game before the season starts, and have your players ramped up and in form. So that's kind of where teams are at right now. It's not you're not in the danger zone for a timeline, but you're getting pretty close. You got to start hammering these things out.
It's getting there.
Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Get your questions in about training camp, contracts, whatever it is in the NFL for our next mailbag segment next week. We do a mailbag every single Wednesday, and we'll continue to do it throughout the season. Make sure you listen to this podcast, and for your second listen, check out everything else going on the podcast, Locked On Podcast Network. We're talking about 200 podcasts. Your team in your sport is covered right here at Locked On, and we've got some new Locked On streaming channels as well on YouTube, Amazon Fire, and many other places. Locked On NFL channel, a Locked On College channel, Locked On Sports Today. So tune in to all of it. Matt and I back Monday right here. Peacock and Williamson.